This story isn't about fairy tales, crowns, or happily ever afters. This is about the moments that made people freeze mid-scroll, clutch their phones, and whisper, did she really just do that? Because somewhere between royal duty and Hollywood hunger, something went wildly off script and the internet never forgot. From the very beginning, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Every room she walked into didn't just notice her, it orbit shifted. Cameras leaned in, attention bent, and empathy? That always flowed in one direction. It started publicly unraveling in 2019 in South Africa, a place weighed down by real hardship, real struggle, real survival. And yet, in front of the world, tears formed. Not for the people around her, but for herself. She softly confessed that not many people had asked if she was okay. And just like that, the oxygen in the room vanished. Viewers blinked. Commentators froze. Because while families nearby were surviving on almost nothing, the spotlight was firmly fixed on her feelings. That wasn't vulnerability, that was tone-deaf theater dressed as honesty. And once the seal broke, the moments kept coming. Later that same year, at a pet charity event, she rose from kneeling and a sharp pop echoed. Was it a chair, a joint, a baby bump shifting shape? No one knew, but the internet exploded. Screenshots flew. Comment sections went feral. Rumors swirled for weeks because whatever that sound was, it didn't match the visual story being told. It wasn't just awkward, it was suspiciously unforgettable. Then came the polo match. July 2019. Sun blazing. Cameras snapping. And there she was, holding her newborn in a way that made people physically uncomfortable. The baby looked unsupported, overheated, unsettled, no shade, no adjustment. For hours, viewers didn't criticize, they panicked. Parents everywhere squinted at their screens, anxiety spiking, whispering, that's not how you hold a newborn. It wasn't malicious, it was alarmingly disconnected. But nothing screams main character energy louder than stealing moments that aren't yours. Princess Eugenie's wedding was supposed to be a celebration of love. Instead, it became a masterclass in subtle spotlight hijacking. Coats stayed unbuttoned, hands hovered near the stomach, and suddenly whispers rippled through the pews. A pregnancy announcement at someone else's wedding before it was even visibly obvious. It was quiet, calculated, and devastatingly effective. And if anyone thought it stopped there, they weren't paying attention. This obsession with being first followed her everywhere, even overseas. In Nigeria, during a ceremonial presentation meant for Prince Harry, she stepped forward, not beside him, not after him, in front of him. The official hesitated, placed the necklace on her, then had to remove it when he realized it wasn't meant for her. Awkward doesn't begin to cover it. The correction said everything words didn't. And then there was that confession. She once revealed that when Harry told her about himself, she asked only one question. Is he kind? It sounded poetic, spiritual, almost saintly. But the irony landed hard because critics had been saying the opposite about her for years. That single line echoed back like a cruel joke, a self-written quote haunting its own author. By the time royal duties were officially dropped, expectations somehow weren't. The Platinum Jubilee was meant to honor Queen Elizabeth, not egos. Yet when seating arrangements placed them far from senior royals, shock flickered across their faces. Cameras caught it, the crowd noticed it, and then came the boos. Real ones, loud enough to sting. A public reminder that status doesn't travel with you when you walk away from responsibility. Then came Invictus, Germany, veterans, sacrifice, discipline, and there she was marching ahead of them. Bare legs, sandals, late arrival, long speech, milkshake anecdotes. The discomfort was visible. Whispers turned to complaints, and by the closing ceremony, she was quietly removed from the program, not announced, just gone. And while all this was happening, money was flowing like a red carpet river. 7 months pregnant, she flew to New York for a baby shower so lavish it felt surreal. A luxury hotel, celebrity guests, designer everything. 6 figures in cost before the baby even arrived. Palace aides cringed. Taxpayers questioned. She later claimed friends paid. But security, jets, logistics, those numbers told a different story. The optics were brutal. Excess wrapped in denial. Public outrage only grew. At a hockey game meant to celebrate Autism Acceptance Night, the camera caught her smiling and laughing during a deeply emotional anthem performance by an autistic singer. The timing felt wrong. The expression felt worse. And backlash hit immediately. Inclusion moments don't forgive misreads. Then Harlem, a low-income school, children needing resources, and she arrived draped in luxury. Thousands on clothing, hundreds of thousands in jewelry. Cameras rolled as she read her book. NDAs were signed, demands were issued, and afterward, the school received 2 crates of vegetables. Parents were furious. Because inspiration doesn't feed hungry kids. And just when people thought the boundary between relevance and restraint couldn't blur further, she recorded an unsolicited graduation speech. Not invited, not scheduled, just delivered. Heavy topics, emotional gestures, leaked afterward. Many saw it not as support, but self-insertion during a national reckoning. By this point, the pattern was undeniable. Wimbledon came next. Entire rows cleared so she could sit. Paying guests displaced. No photos allowed. Security confronting strangers who weren't even photographing her. The entitlement felt louder than the applause. Bananas with handwritten messages meant for struggling workers. A charity visit that backfired instantly. Inspiration turning into insult. A 40th birthday initiative that vanished without a trace, remembered only for one surreal detail. Harry juggling in the background like a punchline nobody asked for. Backless dresses at conservative schools. Children staring in confusion. Cultural norms ignored again. A staged moment reading a text from Beyonce, wide-eyed, breathless, performative. Even Harry looked unsure. The timing, the drama, the disbelief. And through it all, the same question echoed louder every year. Was this misunderstanding or manipulation? Because cringe isn't just awkward behavior. Cringe is what happens when self-importance walks into sacred spaces and forgets why it was invited. And by the time the dust settled on that so-called Beyonce moment, people weren't asking if it was staged anymore. They were asking why everything felt staged. Because nothing about it landed as natural. The wide-eyed gasp, the dramatic pause, the reading aloud of praise like it was a sacred scroll. Even Harry looked like he wasn't sure whether to clap, nod, or quietly disappear into the couch. It didn't feel like a private message accidentally caught on camera. It felt like a performance meant to be remembered. And that's when the bigger picture snapped into focus. This wasn't a collection of random awkward moments. This was a pattern, a rhythm, a repetition of the same behavior dressed in different outfits, different countries, different causes. Always the same result. Attention bending, context collapsing, and the room slowly realizing it was no longer about why they were there, it was about her. People started rewinding clips, comparing timelines, noticing how often the spotlight seemed to drift away from its original purpose. Charity events became fashion showcases. Serious platforms became personal confessionals. Cultural moments became aesthetic backdrops. And the public didn't just cringe anymore, they recoiled. Because there's something deeply uncomfortable about watching privilege cosplay as struggle, about seeing luxury wrapped in the language of sacrifice, about hearing empathy demanded loudly while it's rarely extended outward. The critics weren't just online trolls either. They were parents, veterans, teachers, charity workers, people who had been in those rooms and felt the energy shift, people who had watched moments meant to uplift others slowly morph into carefully framed content. And the more she spoke, the louder the silence around her became. Invitations cooled, appearances felt forced, projects launched with fireworks then vanished without explanation, initiatives that promised impact quietly dissolved. And yet, somehow, the cameras always found her again, smiling, gesturing, positioning herself just a step forward. The irony was brutal. For someone who spoke endlessly about being misunderstood, she rarely stopped to understand the spaces she entered. For someone who preached kindness, her timing repeatedly cut like a blade. For someone who claimed she wanted privacy, every deeply personal moment somehow ended up edited, monetized, and released. And people noticed. They noticed how often children were used as props in photo ops, how frequently trauma was referenced without depth, how often sacred or solemn moments were interrupted by anecdotes that didn't belong there. They noticed the obsession with optics, the angles, the outfits, the symbolism, and how little substance remained once the image faded. Even supporters began to hesitate because defending awkwardness is easy. Defending repeated tone deafness is harder. And defending behavior that consistently overshadows others becomes impossible once the pattern is clear. What made it all so hard to watch wasn't just the cringe, it was the missed opportunities. The moments that could have been genuinely powerful if the focus had stayed where it belonged. The causes that deserved humility instead of headlines. The platforms that required listening, not leading. And instead of learning, the response always seemed to be more speeches, more projects, more explanations, more victimhood, more carefully curated vulnerability that felt increasingly detached from reality. At some point, the public stopped leaning in and started leaning back, because there's a difference between authenticity and performance, and once that line is crossed too many times, even sincerity starts to sound rehearsed. The tragedy of it all is this: cringe isn't born from imperfection. Cringe is born from self-importance colliding with context, from refusing to read the room, from believing every moment needs your voice when sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step aside. And stepping aside was never her strength. So here we are, years later, with a highlight reel nobody asked for, moments nobody can unsee, and a reputation shaped less by intention and more by execution. Not because people wanted her to fail, but because they watched opportunity after opportunity slip through fingers too busy adjusting the spotlight. This isn't a story about hatred, it's a story about discomfort. The kind that makes you shift in your seat, the kind that makes you pause the video, the kind that makes you whisper, why would she do that there like that? And that's why these moments linger. Not because they were the worst things imaginable, but because they were so unnecessary, so avoidable, so painfully public. Because when history looks back, it won't remember the speeches word for word. It won't remember the outfits price tag by price tag. It won't remember the carefully crafted narratives. It will remember the feeling, that collective secondhand embarrassment, that slow realization, that unmistakable sense that somewhere along the way, the story stopped being about service and started being about self. And that, more than anything, is why these moments remain so hard to watch. Remain so hard to watch. Remain so hard to watch.